last week I did some minor rebranding on my channel, and I changed the name of the channel from Creepy Classics, which is the name of my podcast, to Classical JG, which is my username. So I wanted to take this opportunity to explain why, and also to delve a tiny bit into what the word classical actually means anyway. So hi, I'm Juliet, I'm an historian, and usually I specialise in myth, legend, folklore, and the weird and the wonderful. Although today, a bit less of that and a bit more of just, here's why I call myself this. The word classics, classic, classical comes from the Latin classicus. And classicus, if we go to Lewis and Short's Latin dictionary, is defined as a class or division of Roman people, and is often used to refer to belonging to the first class, the highest rank. So the word has connotations of something that is the best, or the highest, or the leading thing in some way. Many people, when they hear the words classics, classical, classic, might think of either music or of literature. So classical music in Western music is basically music that is not folk or pop or rock. It's Wikipedia calls it art music. I usually think of it as just orchestral, usually music without lyrics. Doesn't have to be orchestral, but it's a style of music. It's not restricted to a time period, although confusingly, there is a specific time period in Western music history, which is the classical period. So classical music in general is any time period. The classical period in Western music is the 1750s to the 1820s, and that includes the works of composers like Mozart and Beethoven. So I'm very familiar with that use of the word classical, as my brother is a classical singer. So it's something that I enjoy and that I'm very familiar with, but it is not why I call myself classical. Although I can badly play the violin, slightly less badly play the piano, and very badly play the guitar, my use of classical is not actually anything to do with the musical meaning of it. The second meaning that people often associate, particularly with classics, is literature. So classic literature usually is used basically to mean the best. It's that traditional meaning of the word that goes all the way back to the Latin. It's usually used for books that are considered to be very, very, very good. It is often used of older books, so things like the works of Jane Austen or of Charles Dickens. Those are classics. But again, books don't have to be over 100 years old to be classics. Penguin often have modern classics ranges. It usually has to have been around for a little while to be considered a classic because of that association with this is something that has stood the test of time and that a lot of people think is really good. And it is in that sense also associated with the idea of a canon. So a canon of literature is literary works that form the part of school syllabuses, I should say syllabi as a Roman classicist. They will be books that are taught, books that people think, oh, everybody ought to read these books. And that connection also leads to other uses of the word classics in pop culture. So for example, you get references to classic Star Trek. More usually that's called the original series or TOS, but sometimes you see the original series of Star Trek, that's the one from the 1960s, called Classic Trek. And even more often, the division of Doctor Who, which now confusingly has 3 divisions, but had up until last month 2 primary divisions, Classic Who and New Who. Classic Who was the original run of the show on the BBC from 1963 to 1989, and New Who started in 2005 and runs up to 2022 because they're starting it again. So that's classic in the sense of canonical, in the sense of old, and actually in the sense of original, which is a use that it doesn't usually have in literature, but they all stem from the same idea of something being ranked, highest rank, or in the case of the TV programs, more kind of original, oldest, the canon. Now, my use of the word classics relates to the third major meaning of the word classics, which not everybody is as familiar with as the use of the word in music and in English literature, or literature of other languages, but it is a meaning that will be very familiar to anyone who knows any history, because this is classics as an area of academic study, and that is the study of the literature of ancient Greece and Rome. And the study of the literature of those two civilizations in particular is known as classics. You can also study classical civilization, which is the study of the cultures of Greece and Rome, or classical culture. A lot of people would not use the word civilization anymore, some still do, but either one of those is the study of the culture of Greece and Rome, maybe more often with text in translation, whereas the very traditional study of classics is the study of the texts, ideally in their original language. Classics is one of the oldest subjects studied at British universities, going back to the days where pretty much all they did was theology and classics. It's a core of the development of academia in Britain, certainly, and in Western Europe and the Western world more broadly as well. Now, you can also, of course, study ancient history, which is the study of the history of Greece and Rome, but ancient history also includes Egypt, it includes the ancient Near East, and it could also include other places that are not Western. My ancient history degree covered Egypt, the Near East, Greece and Rome, but ancient history could cover anywhere in the world, whereas classics is quite specific to Greece and Rome. I nearly got rid of the classical in my username and in the title of my channel because it is not unproblematic as a term. The use of classics to refer to the literature of Greece and Rome, or classical culture to refer to their culture, it privileges ancient Greece and Rome over everywhere else in the world, including Egypt, including the Near East, including China and India and all the rest of the globe, that have ancient histories that are just as valid and important as those of Greece and Rome. And of course the word is Latin, and the people who named it classics knew what they were doing, and using classics to refer to the culture of Greece and Rome in particular does imply that they are somehow of a higher rank or better than anywhere else, than any other cultures, ancient or otherwise. And I think when it was given that name, that is what people believed. I don't think any of us believe that anymore. I hope not. I certainly don't. I do not think that the history, culture and literature of Greece and Rome are any more or less important than those of anywhere else in the world. So I thought long and hard about using that name for my channel. I chose Creepy Classics for the podcast a few years ago because I specialise in ancient, medieval and early modern ghost stories on that podcast. There's a heavy lean toward the ancient because that's my specialism, and it made sense as a podcast title for ghost stories. But in renaming my YouTube channel, I seriously considered dropping the classical because I was really worried about this idea that it somehow implies that the history of Greece and Rome is just better or more important or of a higher rank than anywhere else's history. And I'm also not only covering Greece and Rome on this channel. I'm not even restricting myself to ancient, medieval and early modern. My intention with this channel is to cover myth, legend, folklore, ghost stories and kind of weird and wonderful, supernatural, paranormal folk history from all around the world. Having said that, there will inevitably be more of Greece and Rome than, honestly, anything else. Maybe British folklore might be up there with the same amount of coverage, simply because that's my specialism. I've been studying the history, literature and culture of ancient Greece and Rome for 22 years now. I started my undergraduate degree in 2001. So inevitably there will be a lot of that. Alongside British folklore, because I live in Britain. So when I'm going out to find sites to go and explore, those will of course be primarily English and Welsh because of where I live. So I thought, well, keeping the classical in the channel name does at least prepare people for there to be a lot of Greece and Rome on this channel, even though it's certainly not restricted to ancient Greece and Rome. I'm not even restricting it to ancient, medieval and early modern. I do intend to cover any myth, folklore, legend and ghost stories and associated weird and wonderful stuff that I think would be interesting, or that my viewers think would be interesting and that they tell me they would like to hear about. The other reason I kept it is just to kind of acknowledge that that is my core specialism. I'm educating myself in all sorts of other areas of history and other parts of the world, and I have the skills to kind of do the research and look into other areas of history. But ultimately, my original training as an historian was in classics. I have 3 degrees. I have a bachelor's degree in ancient history. I have a master's degree in myth, and that primarily focused on ancient Greece and Rome as well. And I have a PhD in classics. So keeping the name classical, I felt, even if I end up really broadening the scope of this channel, doing loads of British folklore, doing Egypt and the Near East, and I really want to learn more about Japanese ghost stories, about which I know nothing. I would love to look at some Native American legend. There's all sorts of things I would love to learn about. But even if I branch out, I sort of liked the idea of acknowledging that that's where I started. That I will always be classical JG no matter what I cover, because that's where this whole kind of journey, this whole career for me began. I also kept it because I think it sounds quite good, and classical JG kind of works as a name. And I felt like it's not too restrictive, because the word classical has so many other meanings relating to music and literature and even television. I felt like it doesn't imply only Greece and Rome, I think, in a modern context. If I'd said ancient, I would have been restricting myself and the channel to ancient, even if it was all over the world ancient. But I feel like classical as an adjective can mean kind of classical in the sense of something that has stood the test of time, that is interesting and worthy of study. And that meaning of classical, I think, will apply to everything I cover on this channel, I hope. So in the end, although I did seriously consider dropping it because I was really worried about this kind of privileging of 2 specific ancient cultures over everybody else, I thought, no, you know what? I think that word in its modern English usage has a broader range of meanings. And I think it's a range of meanings that I am reasonably happy to be associated with. And if you're wondering what the JG part is, that's just my name. It's Juliet Grace. Not my surname, Harrison, because my particular version of the surname Harrison is spelled with 2 S's. And no one can spell it, and spell checkers can't spell it. And if people try and email me or message me and they miss an S out, it doesn't get through to me. It's just a nightmare. So anywhere I have the opportunity to not include a surname, I just drop the surname. So that's why it's classical JG. The JG is just Juliet Grace. It's just my name. But hopefully that made sense of the rebranding. Nothing is really changing about the channel. I just wanted to make it clear that this channel has a much broader remit than the podcast does. At first it seemed like a really good idea to have a kind of consistent branding, and yes, everything will have the same name as the podcast, but the podcast is much more specific and narrow in its focus. And I want this channel to have a broader focus and a broader spread of content. So I thought it was really important to choose a new name to reflect that. So I will be posting a new podcast episode next week, and I'll put that up here as well, with just a few supporting images. Normally my YouTube videos, of course, I talk to camera. But in the case of the podcast episodes, those I'm going to focus on the audio, get the audio only version of the podcast out. And then I'll just put a few supporting images on the YouTube version only for those videos. Those are only once a month. I'm sure I'll put up a short or 2 next week as well, and then I'll take a short break in the week between Christmas and New Year's. So if you don't end up coming back to the channel again till January, have a lovely holiday if you are in a part of the world that celebrates a holiday at this time of year, and if not, enjoy working. And if you enjoyed this ramble through various meanings of the word classical, do give it a like and subscribe to my channel for myth, legend, folklore, ghost stories and weird and wonderful history from all around the world.